go. All right, Marie, you can start. We're going to record this. Hopefully we'll have it on DVD in case, we can get one of the family in there. All right, Marie, you can go.
Well, for those of you who have been here before, this is the fourth of our series. We're talking about the farms of three. So we're doing 4 of them in the fall, and then we'll do another 4 next spring. So I'll spend the winter time trying to do the farms. And the reason why we started this is Ron Carlton and his wife Kathy, sitting in the back, came and showed us some wonderful pictures of the Tofany farm. And he saw the farmhouse and he said, "Look, everything is this." Well, everything that you're going to see today doesn't exist anymore in terms of the Tofany farm because they ripped down that big, huge house and put the house that's up there today. So Ron graciously came back and forth. We've been sharing pictures, and it's always wonderful as I, preaching to the choir. For those of you who don't save your family things, when you have somebody in your family, give them the stuff. Make sure somebody in the family saves. So Ron's the one in his family, huge family that it is, that has put everything together, and he's saving it for all of his cousins and his kids. So I mean, it's wonderful that you have somebody in the generation that would save. And before I forget to start, all of our programs are free, and what we'd like to do is just pass the hat. So this is to help us keep the lights on. So if you can spare a buck or two, just throw it in the hat, and we'll pass them along and then go to him. So Ron's this is like a tandem thing. We've got a lot of slides, and Ron will supplement the slides with the story. So we're starting with the Lemcke family that came over from Germany. Now, we're still trying to figure out the origin of the family. I was lucky enough to find the family. Henry Lemcke came with his parents, and in 1875, I've got them in Webster. So we still haven't found them moving over to Greece, and then they came over. Now, Henry was born in Germany. He came over in the 1860s, and he got married. So he also had 2 wives. So he married a Shuffler, and then he married Sophie. So he died in 1934. Sophie died in 1946, and they're buried in Hamlin and Lakeside Cemetery. So this is the cobblestone on Peck Road, which is probably another story in and of itself. So Sophie is wife number 2. They had 10 children. So here's all the children. And the direct line that we're dealing with that goes to Ron is Art. So that's why he's in a different color. So Art was born in 1890. So here's Sophie and her son Art in front of the house, which is 606 Longtime Road. Here's Art's sister, Elsie, getting married. This great old wedding dress, so we put that in the family album. So here are the children. Art married Myrtle Gordon in 1914. There's a picture of the 2 of them, and there's a listing of all of their children and when they were born. So now we have Myrtle Gordon. She's the daughter of John Gordon and Nettie Perrin, and here's some pictures of her as a young girl.
Actually, she was 16 years old when this picture was taken.
And then we've got the wonderful picture of Myrtle with her 3 children. And the reason why I put this photograph in is, if you look over here, this is the Snell farm. This is the Snell farm. So you're on the land, you're looking at the house that used to be here.
Yes, it is.
This is Longtime Road, 606. They're over there. They're looking across the street at where this would be. And Myrtle's mom and dad were John Hill Gordon and Nettie Perrin. There's a picture of both of them. I mean, how fortunate to have pictures this long ago. And then here's Nettie's brother. And he died when he was 40 years old. Many of you know the Mitchell family. John married Mary Jane Mitchell. And here's the dates. They had Mary Elizabeth born in 76, John born in 1884, and Thomas was born in 1882. So then Mary, the oldest one, married James Hadlock and moved to Charlotte. They lived on Upland Place in Charlotte. So we started out with a couple of pictures with the headlights, because they're great pictures of an old car. So Art and Myrtle rented the farm north of the Loudon Homestead. Everybody know where the Loudon Homestead is? The big old, what is it, gray? I think it's painted gray this time. It's for sale right now, the Loudon Homestead. And it belonged at that time to Frank Loudon and his son Harrison. And it was 606 Long Pond Road. He worked for Mr. Loudon, and this house was part of his pay. 7 of the children were born in this house before the family moved out to Hamlin and then to 620 Manitow Road. And how fortunate we were to find a piece in the newspaper that showed that Mr. and Mrs. Art Lemcke, who've lived for 18 years on the Loudon farm, are moving to the Clapper farm. So now they know where they moved to, but we don't know who the Clappers are. I wrote to Dick Rum, the town historian, to ask him, who that is, and to find out about that house. So here are the pictures. There's only 2 pictures, which really don't make any sense compared, other than the fact that they were taken at 606. But this is the headlock and Mary Karen headlock. It's a great shot of her cranking up the old car.
And what we found out is actually my great-grandmother's sister, Mary, married a Hadlock, and she was the daughter of that marriage.
And then she winds up marrying a Beatty. So now
She ended up marrying a Beatty. And they lived on James Road. And that's Floyd Beatty. And again, that's at 606 Long Pond Road. And again, they lived down here on James Road with where the Beatty farm was.
And then here's another photograph of the 3-story farmhouse. This was no little cottage. So this is the house that used to be there. What we're trying to figure out is when it came down and when the Tofany, if in fact it was the Tofany who built the new house that's there today.
Yeah.
So this is what the 3-story, and would you say it's a 2-family?
Well, when my grandmother and grandfather lived here in the 20s, it was a single house. There was just one house. The strange part of it is in the 40s. Well, I was born in 1942. Sometime in 1943 in that area, my dad and my mother rented this house. My dad was still in the service. He was still in the Navy, but my aunt Hazel, myself, and my mother lived there. And by that time, they had turned this house into a double. And they had an entry on this side of would be the west side of the porch. Then there was another entry out on this side. And it was a double up and down. It wasn't just one floor. And then another thing here that I was going to talk about, maybe a little, the Snell farm is right across the street. And as a young boy, I went over to the Snell farm. My mother, they were elderly then, and my mother always went over and took care of some of the things for them. And that was Harry, and Mame was his wife, and Rube was the brother. An interesting thing about them is, well, what I remember most of all is walking in the kitchen and the wood fire and the heat from the wood fire. And I always saw something smelling very good, something she was baking. And she was a robust woman. Can I say that? And she always used to pick me up, and I'd get that hug, and I just get melded right into her. And she would set me in a chair, and I always got a big sugar cookie there. Another thing that was very interesting about Harry and Rube, the most of what I remember them working the farm, they worked the farm with a team of horses. If Harry was driving the horses, Rube was walking behind. If Rube was driving the horses, Harry was walking behind. They never went out alone. They always worked together in that. And later on, when they got they got their first tractor, whoever was driving the tractor, the other one was walking behind the tractor. Exactly the same thing. So that's some of my memories of the Snell folks.
Now we're moving over to the big house. This is the Loudon house, and Ron took a photograph of it so that we could put it in so that you could see what it looked like. Now, the interesting part about the Loudons was the fact that Simon Butts, which is an old name, the Butts family came up from Pennsylvania, and Christian Butts was the first pioneer settler that came here. His son was Simon. He was originally married to a Loudon. She died very young. She died at 30 years old, and they had a daughter. Then Simon married Sarah Ellis and had 6 more children. Their daughter wound up marrying Frank Loudon. And according to Lee, who I don't see down here, she was saying that he built this house for his daughter for a wedding present. So that's the house
Must
that's
have been
for
pretty
sale
well
right
off.
now. And here's a photograph from 1928
Yeah.
of Bob and Helen and their pet pig.
Yeah. They
So be the barns in the back.
I always remember. I'm sorry.
No, between the Loudon house
Yeah.
and the.
Yeah. I always remember that my grandmother and grandfather they worked hard, they played hard, and they always had a pet something, either a pigeon or a pig, and they had several dogs throughout their life too, and they were all named Laddie. But the interesting thing here is you can see the barns in the back and the silo, and that, and I think there's another picture you can see where there was a big round driveway that came around from the Loudon house around this way, and that is 7 of my aunts and uncles, the first 7 that were born here in this house at 606. And Mr. Loudon had given those kids those calves to raise for 4-H. Actually, he gave them more than that, but they started out with this. And so these are my uncles and my aunts up there. There's one. I think this picture has 8 in it, and there's somebody that I don't know. There's a stranger in there somewhere. Yeah, but these are the 7 siblings or uncles and aunts that were there. This is now, my mother never cared for this picture. That's my mother right here, and my Uncle Dick, and I believe one of these is Uncle Art and Uncle Bob, and that was in the and one of the things that I remember about this place too is it had a pear orchard in back. When we lived there, it was kind of dilapidated. It was old and that, but actually they picked the pears when my grandparents were there.
This picture isn't that great, but the reason why we put it in is because you can see the orchards in the back, and this also has Ron's mother.
Yeah,
in the photograph.
That's Granny and Grandpa and my mother.
I love that. 1927, isn't that great?
Mm-hmm. And that's me and Mom. Actually, I don't know if you want to know a little, but basically, I was born in the house, and I went to school at number 2 school, and there's some pictures later on, not of me at number 2 school up here, but my mother had her and her siblings went there, and I was told my grandfather went there at one time too, and from there I was transferred to went to 38, then Shalat Junior High, and then Shalat, and then when Greece built their first high school, I went my junior and senior year and graduated, first graduating class of Olympia. So that's my grandfather in 1926, I believe. And this again is on the farm. That's the house. This is in the side field there, and that's a picture that basically I found in my grandfather's things. It was a little bitty picture like this, and I scanned it at the highest resolution I could, and it come out pretty good. Here again, this is one of the winters that I remember. Everybody says the worst winter ever. Well, we used to have some snow, and this is Mom and me in front of the house, and probably my grandfather plowed that snow bank up there.
And Ron's the oldest of the 3 children in the family. So here's another.
Yeah, and one of them cars is my dad, by the way, my dad's car. I don't know which one, but it was an old Chevy. I hated that thing because I had to sit in the back seat, and that's the old house.
This is a great shot.
This again, we put it in because it shows the barns and the silo in the back, and this was taken in the 40s, and actually 1940, and these are my grandmother's sister-in-laws, most of them. And I assume it was a reunion because our family was great for reunions, and they started out having reunions when there was only a half a dozen people or a dozen people came, and we ended up in the heyday years of in excess of 200 people.
Well, if Henry and Sophia had 12, then Art and Myrtle had 16.
Yeah.
You've got a whole boatload of first cousins right
Yeah.
there, let alone when they start
Well,
having kids.
2000.
Don't put the paper in front of
Oh,
the microphone.
oh, okay. I'm sorry. One other sidelight on that: when my grandmother passed away, there was 57 of us first cousins. There was 119 of the extended family in that. So I still have 49, I think, cousins still alive, first cousins still alive.
This is interesting because this shows the Loudon house from the Tofany house, from the Lemcke farm.
Yeah, in the picture you saw earlier, I picked it out because of this. I think this was like a sunroom or a porch up here. I never got too far into the Loudon house. Yeah, I went in the front door, but that was about it. they were. Yeah, I should go look at because they were very private and except. Can I say this? Of course, we lived across this driveway from them, and we could hear the arguments. So
you didn't have to live on top of it.
no. There's the first of the kids. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, that's the first 7 that were born in that house. And there they are again. Yeah, yeah. That's a little later on. You can see the cows were getting older. This picture was taken from north to south. This is the way the house looked like. When I lived there, this was a pasture for black cows. But some interesting that these 2 big willow trees, and there used to be a deep ditch with always water in it, and we used to have string on a pole, and we used to fish in it. We never caught anything, and so that's now Stouds, right?
Yeah, so now we're coming to the good story.
Okay, all right.
The old swimming hole.
Okay.
The
well, the Stout family has or Stout farm has quite a history for me. I started out doing things on the Stout farm when I was probably 10, 11 years old, and there was a fellow by the name of Ray Cooper, and his brother was the superintendent of highways at that time. But Ray had a little drinking problem. And Ray lived in a little shack off the driveway, right there. Not hardly large enough for had a stove, had a potbelly stove and a bed in there that I remember. And Ray used to hire me to mow the lawn and weed the gardens. But I think Ray got to live in that little shack for mowing the lawn and doing the gardens. And so I would go to Lindsay's corner store up here at the corner of Long Pond and Latta with a gallon jug, put 25 cents worth of gas in it, ride my bicycle down there and mow the lawn, and Ray would give me the 25 cents for the gas and 50 cents for mowing the lawn. Well, he watched me and he drank beer. So now, so now I have a lot of good memories. Now, I was very young here when they were doing this. A couple of things I remember about the Stout farm. I always had a huge stack of hay in the barnyard, and I had my Uncle Jerry work for Ed Stout personally. My Uncle Red worked the farm for Ed Stout, or maybe rented it from Ed Stout. I don't know. He worked the whole farm. And my Uncle Bob did. And my Uncle Bob gave my dad a call one day because the haystack had collapsed on the cows, and they were suffocating in there. And most of my uncles got a call, and they were out and they were frantically digging the cows out. And they only one of them died. And of course, my uncle butchered it right away. This actually is my Uncle Bob right here. And
who dug this?
Pardon? And he actually dug that. He dug that with one of those scooper things that you had 2 handles and a scoop, and with a horse. Okay, the Stout Farm is just down the road, just down the ways where the creek crosses Long Pond Road, and this basically is just south of that. Yeah, right here. Here's the. Now we used to call when I first said to Marie, I said the Singing Bridge, and but years ago this used to be a metal bridge that you would hum when you went across it. But that's where and the Stout House is right here, and then that pond is over in where those trees are right now.
Is the pond still there?
The pond, well, the creek is filled in,
Oh.
but I went to look for it, and I couldn't tell exactly where it was anymore.
Yeah,
But
one of these days, going the wrong way. One of these days, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the picture of the four little Stout boys,
yeah,
because for anybody who recognizes that name, they wound up being bootleggers.
yeah.
Oh.
Well,
Okay?
well,
they ran.
This is
like Ontario, the Stout boys.
yeah. This is the Stout House. Now, a funny thing. This is another funny story. My cousin's been going to the Historical Society in Hilton, and he learned about a Bernie Winghart. And Bernie Winghart, there's a book about him. It says, "Bernie, you're a bootlegger." And so Terry was telling me about that book, and so I read it. And while I was reading it, what names pop up was the Stout brothers. And it says in the book, the Stout brothers had a 27-foot boat with a machine gun on the front, and they were bad actors, okay? But also it said in the book that the Stout brothers, their father, was the postmaster general in Rochester, New York. And at that time, the only federal building in Rochester was the post office. So when they confiscated booze, they put it in the post office. Okay, now Bernie Winghart bootlegged into Braddock's Bay and distributed west, and the Stout brothers bootlegged into Shalat. And now, also in the book, they respected Al Skinner. Al Skinner wasn't the sheriff at that time, but he was a federal officer, and they respected him, so they were very careful not to run their booze at the same time Al Skinner was around. So, but anyway, I asked my Uncle Jerry, because Uncle Jerry worked for Ed Stout, and he had a story too, because he was working on a planter. You used to sit low and you put the tomato plants in or something. He got his leg caught and cut it really severely. And Ed Stout actually took him to the doctors, had him fixed up, took him over to Granny's, and paid him his salary until he was able to come back to work. And so just a few weeks ago, I asked my Uncle Jerry, I said, "Did you know Ed Stout was a bootlegger?" He said, "Everybody knew Ed Stout was a bootlegger." So, except for me. Yeah. So.
And then about owning the Grove House.
Is that right? Now, in Ed Stout, it says in his obituary, actually owned the Grove House, too, at one time, and he owned another restaurant. So. Oh, yeah, is that right? Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, that's the picture of Ray's. Okay, now, this is the Beatty farm.
Which is the Dennis Snell.
Yeah.
On this side of Plum.
Well, my story here is I went to work for Chuck Beatty. Chuck and Connie Beatty were running the farm at that time. And I didn't realize, so I just called Connie Beatty. I didn't realize a couple of things until I just talked to her yesterday. Chuck didn't want to hire me. I was a skinny little kid, and I lied to get my work papers from the doctor because I had rheumatic fever when I was a kid, and I had a heart murmur, and they didn't want me to work on heavy, work hard. So I actually lied I said, I'm not going to do work like that and that. So I come down to Chuck, and because I had a farm background, I mean, I'd been milking cows with Grandpa and stuff like that, and I wanted to work for Chuck Beatty. I was 14, and he wasn't going to hire me, Connie said at first, but then I kind of begged him, and so he hired me. My first job was in the spring, pitching manure out of the calf pens, and it was deep, and the story I got there, when I got home that evening after working all day, and I walked in the kitchen in the house up here, why my mother said, "Out, take those clothes off outside. So she passes me a towel, and I had to take all my clothes, my stinky cow clothes off outside. Okay, and then of course after that, Chuck and I got. I mean, I really I loved the man. He always used to say, "God, that's good." He had a little lisp, and he said, "God, that's good." And but a couple of things. He used to try to outwork us when he was putting hay up in the mow and was on the conveyor. He would just go like crazy to try to make us say uncle in the mow and hold off, And it was a competition because we just piled that mow as fast as we could. Another thing that's interesting that I actually met my first black man working for Chuck. It was a fellow by the name of Willie. I don't know if any of the old timers would remember old Willie, but Willie had an infectious smile. He was a great old guy, and just we worked side by side, and I worked with Chuck on occasion up until the time I graduated from high school and got a full-time job in the city. So, and basically we hoed squash, we did hay, we plowed, we disked, we dragged, we did all the stuff that needed to be done on the farm. But what was unique about Chuck, he had milking machines, and we were used to milking like this. So when we did milk, and another interesting thing, Chuck says you can have a drink of milk out of the cooler, but don't drink the cream because the cream meant the money. Okay, so.
Constance Way, right behind them, is named after Connie.
Oh, is it really? Connie lives in. Pardon? English Station. Yeah, and she's 85 years old. I talked to her yesterday. I finally found her phone number and looked her up, and she sounds sharp as a tack, and she's yes.
Give me an idea of what year it was with the milking machine.
Well, it had to be. I born in 42. I was 14, so the 50s, 56 or so. Yeah, yeah. And he had a cooler too, which see my grandfather never did. The milk went immediately from the pails into the churn, and while some went in to be cooled, but went in the churn. I was going to say this later on, but something my grandmother did when she was younger, or when the family was in, she made butter for everybody in the family, all 16 children, and we all had either a 3-pound crock or a 5-pound crock. And so when we run out of butter, the empty went there, and a new crock come to every family, and she made butter for years for everybody.
Now we're moving to Betsy and Penny Bowers, and they had the corner store up here next to the schoolhouse. And here's
Yeah,
his aunts and uncles.
yeah. There's some of them that you can pick out a Lemcke pretty easy. There's the girl Lemcke's not so much, but um, this I think is Hazel and Art. They're early on. This is when my mother went there. And my mother is third one, two. This is my mother, and this was a few years ago, and my mother's going to be 94, but she was still. I think she picked out 17 of the 23 names of 23 kids there, or something like that. And there's names like Fleming, of course, Lemcke, Miller, Shermy Miller. These are names I have. Billy Barnes. There's the Barnes family. Um, these are all people that you know we uh, we knew of later on in life. This this again. This is the class, and this is apparently would be on the southwest corner because this big old house was in the background. That was on Ladder Road.
So now the family moved to Manitow Road, and this is an aerial view of the house and the barn at Manitow Road, and there was no indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
16 kids.
Yeah.
No indoor plumbing. Need ice anymore.
Marie wanted me to tell you because I told her the
The
story. The outhouse was right under this tree right here, and it was a 3-holer, and it was two steps. There was the adults, 2 hole for adults, and 1 hole for the kids. And what I heard one time that in the summertime was 100 yards too close, in the winter 100 yards too far. You know, but that's what. But as the farm went, Granny always had a flower garden. Granny was noted for her flower garden, but they always had a vegetable garden as well. The barnyard was out here, and there was a lane that went down here to an apple orchard and also the pasture. And and Grandpa, he always had a wheat lot and oats for the animals, and the thrashers did those. We never did. But then he had a couple hay lots and that. But I can remember going and getting mushrooms with my grandmother. My grandmother was the only one that knew the mushroom from a toadstool and that, and picking apples and picking pears and things like that.
Orchards at this house?
Yes, there was the orchards are down here.
Okay.
Hmm. And she always had a large row of grapes too. And something else I don't know if it's out of sequence, but there was always salt pork. We always had they always had a breeder set of pigs. Generally milk 3 to 5 cows. Milk them by hand. Always some pigs to butcher. Chickens, chicken coop right here. Chickens, ducks, geese. I always had that. Um, and like the salt pork, big crack of salt pork and a thing. And one of the things I don't know, well, maybe you folks know about it, but salt pork is a great remedy for blood poisoning. Did you know that? We were always stepping on nails, getting cut, getting infection. And Granny would go down in that crock and get a hunk of salt pork, throw it on that infected area, and tape it up, and that salt pork would draw that infection out of our leg or our foot or something. So, but had a lot of fun. Things like this, the old cutter that was there in the barn for years. That old cutter, and just
This
every.
house is much smaller than the house that was over here.
Oh yeah.
So, more kids, less house.
Sometime in the late, oh, let's see, when was it? They did take this. This was a back bedroom at one time, and they converted that to a bathroom in probably late 50s, early 60s. One of the things that I remember about my grandmother and grandfather, well, first of all, when my grandfather moved to Manitou Road, I this is an assumption. I assumed that the farm couldn't handle the number of children he had. He went to work for the highway department here in Greece, but he also worked the entire farm. So, and I don't know if it's because of that, but anytime there was work to be done, the family all, if on the weekends, this was probably a weekend that it's time to do the hay and the entire family. I wish these were better pictures. These again were the little bitty pictures my grandmother had, and I scanned them. This is my grandmother, by the way. And Grandpa loved them, the apples there, but they did take him for a ride one time. Something spooked him when he was working a field once, and there was 4 farms on Manitou Road there, and the farm north of Grandpa's was the Parker farm, and this set of horses dragged him through 2 hedgerows and 2 fence lines, and he wouldn't let them go, and and that's another reason a lot of us worked the farm for a while, because Grandpa was really beat up. This is me and 2 of my cousins. This is Bonnie and Butch. Bonnie's passed away. That's me and he's the oldest cousin now. He's a year older than I am. And this is my grandfather's obituary. A story about my grandfather that always impressed me in that my grandfather never went to a doctor, but he smoked all his life, and he ended up with lung cancer. And my Uncle Jack took him up to Roswell in Buffalo a few weeks before he passed away. And they had him, my Uncle Jack says, sitting on a little metal stool in the middle of this room with no clothes on, except one of them smocks over him. And he sat there for a while they were out maybe making a diagnosis or something. And he said to Jack, "Come here." He said, "Jack, get my clothes." Jack says, "They're not done, Dad." And he said, "Get my clothes." Jack got his clothes. He walked out of Roswell, went home and died. So he just couldn't take the indignant crap that they were putting him through, you know.
And then here's the newspaper article saying when Myrtle died, she left the house with 19.
Yeah, this is a better story of death. We went over when we found out. We went over the day Granny died, and we all went in, and she was still in bed, and it was like she was still sleeping. And not everybody dies peacefully in the world, but my grandmother did, and that's always that image has always stuck with me. The fact that she went to sleep one night and just didn't wake up, you know. So, and she did leave. She left a, a tremendous legacy. Um, Something that I don't know if I'm a little out of order too. I haven't looked at my crib sheets or anything, but my grandmother had Sunday dinner for everybody for years, the entire extended family, and the house would be full. And I could go on for hours telling you stories of what those kids did bad and good and that around the farm when we all got together and us cousins on that farm. But for several years, when we lived here and Grandpa got older, I would go across the street on Friday night and ride home with him so I could help do the chores with my Uncle Donald. So we could do the chores on a weekend to give Grandpa a little break. So then when we had the Sunday dinner, then I would ride home with my parents and, you know, for the next week. But I can remember 2 turkeys on the table, 2 hams on the table, just, you know, and of course the adults sat around the kitchen table, which was very large, and us kids were on card tables and stuff like that. Some in the living room, some on the porch, you know. But just this is Grandpa Lemcke with his truck number 84, and that's I believe in front of the 606, but it's near there. Otherwise, my mother wouldn't have been able to take the picture. So it's right across the road here. And there he is again. This is actually the Snell farm again. So that is right on. So. Actually, the horse farm, yeah, it is different. There on Manitou Road, there was the Martin and Main Ash, and then the Warboys farm, and then my grandmother's farm. The Warboys farm, my uncle purchased. My uncle, they call him Red. His name's Alan. He purchased it, and that's the horse farm. So it's right next to the next one down, right on the hill, just before you drop down into the bay area.
So Lemcke did all this.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, Jane still owns. Now they did sell some of the land in the back to the town of Greece, I think, for a green area or something. But Jane still owns the biggest part of that farm. Yeah. Grandpa and his brother, his youngest brother, that was around 1963, I believe, somewhere in there. This is Granny, and this was for the picture she got a painting the one of the her kids, I think Betty Lou, had this picture painted of Grandpa from a photograph. And that. And then another big memory is Christmas Eve. We always had Christmas Day at our house, and the rest of the families did do. But Christmas Eve was at Granny's, and my grandmother made somewhere in terms of 40 loaves of bread. And it came from a tradition that they had way back with the Lemcke tradition when they used to make homemade sausage, have homemade bread and homemade sausage was the dinner for Christmas Eve. Well, she was still making sausage early on, but then we went to Thuringer, later on in life. But she made that bread, and it's a recipe that has been passed on. And now the person that makes the bread now for the family is sitting in the back. It's my wife. So she makes about 40 some loaves of bread. We still get together at the Hilton Exempt on Christmas Eve or around Christmas time, and we still have the traditional bread and the Thuringer and stuff like that.
Did you have a smokehouse at all? Or did they just do it like in a room in the basement?
I don't remember the separate smokehouse, but you want to know something? My uncle Bob made smokers out of, well, for a while, old refrigerators and things like that. So I believe that Bob, by that time, was doing the smoking and that was, Bob's son was one of the ones who I thought was going to come today, Terry, and he could, This is my grandfather here, Art Lemcke. Uh, this is John, and he was one of the first, from the first
From wife
number one,
so
who was
the daughter died.
yeah,
So
yeah,
from wife number one, and then the other
yeah. And
from
she was a chef.
Sophia.
She was a chefler, and that. And now these are the rest of my great aunts and uncles. Except this is Sophia and Henry. That's my great grandmother and great.
John so big, he died in Morton, New York. And he had, I think, 14 or 16 kids of his own. So now we have to trace that line, but that would be from wife number one. And then we go to the family reunion in 1961.
Yeah, this basically, my uncle got married in 61, and the family was all there, and they took this picture. I actually have a picture of the entire family when he was probably about 3, and my Aunt Betty Lou was the next one. She was probably 4 or 5.
This is a great
This is,
picture. I had to put this in.
this is,
Look at the faces.
This is, we're trying to figure out, I definitely know this one. That's my sister and my cousin Darlene. And this is, I guess, Terry and his brother Danny. And I don't know if that's Linda or what. So, that might be my brother Don. Cause,
we have to be smaller, right?
Yeah.
And then we go into the 60s.
Yeah, this was, and for years, Granny would make sure there was a gift for everyone under the tree. The first, there's her sons and daughters and their children. But then after a while, then it became just the kids under 16 and that. So early on, I can remember when the tree was, you couldn't hardly see but the top of it from the gifts. But then every year after that, everybody gave Granny and Grandpa a gift. Grandpa usually got actually a big jug of something, and
something good.
Yeah. This is my grandmother and her sister-in-laws, except for this is Uncle Elmer, the youngest brother, and actually Dora's his wife, but this is his sister, and these are her sisters, and that's my grandmother in the middle. And she had to put this one in, and guess who that is? You got time for a quickie on the guitar? When I was just big enough to hold an accordion, my dad bought an accordion and set it on my lap. And I took accordion lessons up until I was about 14 years old. I broke his heart when I was 14. My music teacher was a big, jolly Italian guy. I loved the guy, And I played the beer barrel polkas, and I played all the polkas, and all the classicals. And I told my dad I didn't want to take accordion lessons anymore. I wanted to switch to a guitar. And this was 14. He says, and that's one of the reasons that stimulated me to go to Chuck Beatty and for a job. He says, you can go ahead and get a guitar, but you're going to buy it yourself. I'm not going to pay for it. I'm not going to pay for lessons, right? So at 14, I did buy my first guitar.
So how did you get the money to buy the car?
Pardon?
How did you get enough money to buy the car?
Well, that was a that was a short-lived car.
That's another story.
Yeah, that's another old story. And it turned out I didn't have quite enough money to support that car at that time. So this is my mom's house today, and that's right at 668 Long Pond Road, just up the road, right next to the Country Crossing. The next one south of Country Crossing. Country.
And here again, something important. That
Oh, Kentucky Crossing, yeah.
That his father built this house.
Yeah.
So you've got the history of another house.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's unique, Dad never had a bit of a mortgage. So he built the house a little at a time, and again, our family always got together, aunts, uncles, and in-laws. And so my dad and my uncles built the basement, capped it over the first year, and then when he got enough money, he started building some more, and he did borrow a couple of $1,000s at one time. And then we moved in this house in 1952. It wasn't quite done then. We had the rough, no hardwood floors, the rough floors and stuff like that. In fact, Dad had gone out to his dad's farm on Center Road not Holly, Murray, and cut down some oak trees, had them planked, and had the oak in the basement of this house drying, so so, and I lived there up until, I went into service in '63, come back, lived there for a few weeks. Then after that, yeah, that's another story. I was married. We had one son. Dad worked for Rochester Products, and he got up very early in the morning, went to work, and I'm getting on tangents, but and so we'd been there a couple of weeks, and having coffee with him before he went to work. She's still in bed, and he looks across the table. He says, "When are you going to get a job?" I had just spent, 4.5 years in the Navy, and I was ready to vegetate, right? Well, as luck would have it, he says, Kodak's hiring, I think. So I went up to Kodak, and I'll be darned if they didn't say, that was on a Wednesday. He asked me, can you start tomorrow? And I said, how about Monday? So I had done some things in the service that Kodak was very interested in security clearances and stuff, so they hired me right away. This is a Google Earth picture. Has anybody seen this before? This is where we stand, right? This is where we are, right here, right there. And now, what used to bring a tear to my dad's eye when he saw all this happening, he said, of all the crappy, clay, rocky soil out along Ridge Road that nobody's building a house on, and they're building houses on all this fertile land, all this fertile farmland in the town of Greece, So anyway, if you look, well, it's difficult, but that was basically, I did a search on 606, so that's right about where 606 is. The Snell farm is pretty much in the green here where because the town ended up with the Snell farm because they didn't have any living relatives at the time. The Loudon house would be, right here. The Beatty farm would be this land here. And again, this is still pretty green. Geisler, I think, owns this down here, doesn't he? Pardon? The Stout farm is. I think we got another picture that has the Stout farm. Actually, this is the creek that runs down through there. Yeah, and we used to fish that creek and get minnows out of it and stuff like that. When I lived there, it was Earl de Colin from Parma owned it, and that pretty much, and that took most of the land that Loudon owned at the time. or earlier. And I had heard a story that during the Depression, when times were bad, they either lost the farm or sold the farm. Don't know. I talked to some Loudon descendants, and they had never heard why the farm was sold, or So
Does anybody know the Tofany bought it? Anybody know the Tofany?
I think it had to be right in the early '60s.
Huge meeting because the barn with the American Baptist painting on it, you know what I mean? Very big. Help me, Bill. It was the Reed farm, I think it's Minnesota. The name. His wife is a coffee. How dedicated.
Mm.
That's what we were trying to figure out, is why
Yeah.
the Tofany.
Well,
Because we don't know when that big house came down, or why. Did it burn down, or did they take it down? Did the Tofany do it, did somebody own it before the Tofany?
see, I can't remember either whether I was in the service when they took it down or not, but I know the land was sold, and then it sat idle for a long time. Nobody lived in the house, nobody worked the farm,
But the house was still there.
but the house was still there. Now, after I got out of the service in '67, and the house was gone by then. So, this was a great story too. If you got time, that little truck, my grandfather's truck number was 84, and I was so close to my grandfather. We went up to, I thought it was a 5 and dime, but a Woolworth's or Neisner's up on Ridge and Dewey, which was up in the big city. And we went in the store, and they had all these trucks there, but they didn't have a solid red one. They had red and green, yellow and red, and that. So my aunt and I did a nasty thing. We took 2 trucks apart and made one red one. Well, then you can't see it here, but then I painted the Grease Highway Department on it and Grandpa's number 84. And so when he saw that, you could see his eyes lit right up. Now this is his retirement party. Now I know this is Al Skinner. This is one of my great uncles, and one of these is a Kintz, and I don't know which. Does anybody know which one was a? Because he was the highway superintendent when Grandpa retired. I don't know. I have an idea. This was the Kintz. We got a picture of Gordon. This is the only building that's left from the old place that I remember. That used to be the workshop for the farm, and it's still right across the street. And I see this is Gordon Howe here.
He was the supervisor from
He was
34 to 19.
Does anybody else remember Gordon Howe? He was a big old man, wasn't he? He was a big man. See, we played ball in the front of the yard for years, and I was telling this lady here that one of the things I remember, there used to be a big old bell on like a telephone pole up, and it had a chain, or not a chain, but a rope on it, and the bell was about that big. And when dinner was ready in the Howe house, they rung that bell, and the whole neighborhood knew what time it was then. So
That's the end of our story, and I have to thank Ron for taking all the time and helping me with what to share with the future generations to come. So if anybody's got any questions, if not, you're welcome.
Yes, sir.
What war were you in?
Vietnam. Yeah. Mostly.
Please help yourself to refreshments and gifting.
What's the 620 Minnesota house?
The same house is there. When my uncle took over the farm, one of my uncles took over the farm, he built another house beside the barns, and that's still there. The barn, I'm sad to say, is fallen down. And my cousin owns the house that was built next door and part in the barns, and I think she's given it. She tried to sell it, but nobody would buy it with those barns the way they are. So she told the bank,
I think people were even buying it, but they couldn't buy it.
because of the barns. Yeah, the barn looks pretty good in the front, but it's falling down in the back. And so east side, it's just in the